Glasgow, the city of culture, once the home of razor gangs fighting turf wars. A century ago, the second city of the empire and the shipbuilding capital of the world. But great wealth coexisted with deep poverty.
Guess I know the city like a lover. Good or bad, it's hard to love another that I find. This is no mean town, no mean city.
So Glasgow's corporation launched a democratic revolution.
Far away, I long to see you. In my mind, I know you'll always be around. This is no mean city.
The city wanted, and knew how to get, prosperity for everyone.
City life is strange. You take a share of the good times and bad times.
In 1905, Glasgow's corporation wanted to change the way it funded its services. Glasgow petitioned government for a radical change in taxation.
In the early years of the last century, the city chambers in Glasgow, here in Glasgow, were dominated by radical liberals who were in favour of the taxation of land values in place of the existing rating system. And in 1906, the Lord Provost of Glasgow, Sir William Billsland, met in London with the then Chancellor of the Exchequer, Herbert Asquith, to present a petition that had been drawn up on behalf of 518 local councils throughout the United Kingdom, promoting the cause of land value taxation, a cause taken up subsequently by Asquith's successor as Chancellor, David Lloyd George. In the reports of the meeting in the local press, it was recorded that this was a question which closely affected all municipalities, and especially in those cities where there were slums and congested districts. They had seen agricultural land rapidly taken up for building purposes at greatly enhanced value by the development of municipal tramway services. The great increase given to the value of land by such improvements, and not subject to adequate taxation, had so impressed the minds of municipal representatives that, unless powers were given, such as in the bills that these representatives had been promoting, with Glasgow in the vanguard, their future actions would be paralysed in carrying out much needed improvements. In dealing with a subject so vital to municipalities, the report went on, as the congestion of street traffic, the taxation of land values as applied to new streets that would be opened would greatly encourage authorities to grapple with this question of congestion and slums. So Sir William Billsland laid upon the table 518 petitions from the rating authorities in all parts of the United Kingdom and Ireland.
Today, Glasgow is again seeking a fair tax deal. But what went wrong a century ago?
The great urban landowners perhaps became more prosperous than the great rural landowners. And they were dominating the House of Lords in those days. Herbert Asquith, who succeeded Campbell Bannerman in 1908 as Prime Minister, he then threatened to appoint a sufficient number of Liberal peers to the House of Lords to overturn the House of Lords blocking of the legislation that the Commons was trying to pass. And finally, what happened was that the House of Lords' power to interfere with a finance bill was abolished. They could delay, but they could not stop the passing of a finance bill and other types of legislation. So this land agitation movement that was so much dominated by the city of Glasgow has an important place in British history, British constitutional history.
In 1909, Parliament enacted the People's Budget, but the aristocracy scuttled the law. Chancellor David Lloyd George was backed by Winston Churchill, who directed his fiery rhetoric at the great landlords. They treated Britain as their private estate. Churchill wanted to reclaim for everyone an equal birthright in land. Government had the overwhelming mandate of the people, but the aristocracy used every dirty trick in the law books to block the reform. That's why Britain suffered the land speculation that led to the 1929 slump. So in 1931, Chancellor Philip Snowdon reintroduced the land value tax to try and close the gap between the rich and the poor, a tragedy that still afflicts cities like Glasgow.
The way in which the present system works is such as to bring about poverty and demoralisation. So the evidence of something wrong, something seriously wrong with the present system, is before our very eyes.
Again, in 1934, Parliament failed to implement its reform. In the post-war years, Labour governments tried to nationalise the land, but their development land taxes deterred development. Britain suffered wave upon wave of property booms and busts.
The boom and slump in the economy is largely a matter of the boom and slump in land prices. People talk about house prices, but what they really mean is the value of land. It's not the value of bricks and mortar, which is rising and falling dramatically over the business cycle. It's the value of the land upon which the houses and the shops and the offices sit. And if there were a tax on land values, there wouldn't be the boom and slump in the capital values of land, which are based on movements in rentals. If rentals were to be taxed and were to move more smoothly with the growth of the economy, then there wouldn't be the same cyclical booms and slumps as we have experienced.
Even as general incomes rise, millions of families are unable to break out of the grip of poverty. Glasgow suffers more than its share of the ill health linked to low incomes.
It is so unfair that children born within sight of the River Clyde, here in Glasgow, can expect to die 10 years or more earlier than children born within sight of the River Thames in one of the choice areas of London. And wealth buys health. The average household wealth for people in Scotland as a whole is 1/4 of that for households in London. And this is the consequence of a tax system which has failed to create a level playing field and which has failed to ensure equal life chances.
Then, in 1999, power was devolved to Parliament in Edinburgh. Land reform was promised for the people of Scotland.
The land reform programme had largely been set during the previous 2 years by the Land Reform Policy Group, which had been established by the Scottish Office. They saw the land reform issue as primarily a rural one because simply most of the land area is actually rural. But the bulk of the land value is concentrated in our towns and cities where the vast majority of people live and work. So the land reform programme was destined to be a marginal consequence to most of us. There was no consideration given to the problem of urban land speculation, of houses being kept vacant, of land being held idle while people are homeless, people are living in squalor, and people can't get onto the housing ladder. This was a real lost opportunity because the Land Reform Policy Group did consider land value taxation among its options, and they did consider it as a possible replacement for the council tax. They also noted that it would encourage more efficient use of land. But they also realised that it was going to bring down property prices. But they saw this, ironically, as a disadvantage. Well, perhaps back in the late 1990s, when all this was happening, they didn't want to spoil the illusion of prosperity that rising house prices created. But they failed to grasp the significance of the way that land value taxation would take the speculative element out of the real estate market. And this is the key to eliminating the destructive boom-bust cycle that we've now had to live through once again.
If government were to retake the community ground rent, it would logically follow that maligned taxes could be dropped and economic activity increased. During the 18th century Scottish Enlightenment, Adam Smith in his Wealth of Nations and William Ogilvie of Aberdeen in his essay on the right of property in land explained the economic and moral arguments. And a century later, an American economist, Henry George, rallied progressive thinking behind land value taxation to ensure that progress would no longer march side by side with poverty.
Glasgow's council has now reopened the debate on tax reform.
The Glasgow Green Party councillor, Stuart Clay, was instrumental in persuading Glasgow City Council to undertake a pilot study of a representative area of the city to see whether land value taxation would be feasible and practicable. Their conclusion was very positive. There were no problems of implementation and valuation. But in addition, it stated, to quote, land value tax would be relatively buoyant, that is, revenues would grow in line with population and business, whilst retaining a degree of predictability and stability by helping to smooth market fluctuations. Land value tax is more closely related to local services, it went on. That is, land value tax would automatically reflect levels of public investment, thus ensuring that local beneficiaries would essentially fund such investment. So, Stuart, what do you see as the main advantages of land value tax as a reform of local government finance?
Well, there's really two issues that I see as key here. The first is the idea of land speculation and land banking, whereby speculators can hold pieces of land for as long as time as they want until they feel that they can make enough money and sell it on at a profitable price. Land value tax would discourage that idea and would force people into actually doing something productive with the land rather than just sitting on it. This also relates to the boom and bust cycles that we have. When we know the market is high, people will demand to build the houses quickly and as soon as possible. When the bust comes in, that means lots of people stop working and we affect jobs and wealth within the city. The second key is this understanding our assets and knowing what land we have, and by putting on a fiscal control of our green spaces and of our greenbelt land, thus preventing the idea of urban sprawl. Urban sprawl is a real problem. It cuts away our agricultural land, increases the price of food, and also affects our natural environment. So again, the land value tax very much helps us control the idea of urban sprawl.
Farmers and the countryside would also gain from this tax reform, according to Dr. Duncan Pickard. He lectured at Leeds University before taking up farming in Fife with his two sons.
I would be quite happy to pay the equivalent of the rental value of this farm, of the bare land, the unimproved value of the land, in taxation every year for the privilege of being able to farm here. But that would be conditional upon reducing the burden of taxation like income tax and NIC. It would be a much simpler system. You wouldn't have a huge burden of expense, both in me explaining how much income I make and the Inland Revenue checking those figures and calculating how much tax I'm supposed to pay. The deadweight loss of even the government itself admits to at least 30% of the cost of the income, revenue income, is spent in administration of collection of that tax, whereas a simple site value tax would be much more simple to operate. Well, the biggest problem is that we as farmers, if we own the farm that we've got, we're quite comfortable. It's those people who can't get access to land who are not organised in any sort of way, who really should be shouting out that effectively we've got a land monopoly. Only those of us who currently own land are in a position to buy more. And because the tax system says that we'll be better off the more property or more land that we own, we're encouraged to maximise the size of our holding. If we had a land value tax system, those remote fields that are less profitable than those that are nearer to or on the homesteading would be freed up for somebody else to take on. And you would have a big increase in the number of holdings and the number of people wanting to farm. They could start part-time in farming the way we started when I had a job at the university and was able to farm part-time until we could build up sufficient to farm full-time. I could see that being a very positive way forward. And for anybody to think that chucking more money at new entrants to enable them to buy a farm is just nonsense, because all that does is put up the price of the farms that they're trying to buy. People in education with no prospects of employment, it's very difficult to motivate those people to learn anything. Large numbers of my friends that I see who have teenage children who seem like they've dropped out of the system because they can't see a light at the end of the tunnel. With increasing employment on the way, they can't get access to an affordable house, and they tend to drop out and become disruptive elements in most major cities. And I think this is all part of the consequences of a taxation system which penalises enterprise and employment. And I think this is only going to get worse.
Every town and city suffers from policies that distort the way we use land, causing urban sprawl and expensive houses.
But Churchill, he said that the mother of all monopolies was the monopoly in land ownership, in the sense that land, there are many parcels of land, but there's not competition in the sense that each piece of land is unique. It can't be moved. Just because this piece of land is worth double what that piece of land is worth, you can't move this piece of land to that piece of land to equalise the price of land. It doesn't work that way because land is special. It's completely different from movable machinery and equipment and raw materials. If the price of cement goes up higher in this location than that location, it will move to where there will be arbitrage to equalise the price of movable goods and services. Not so with land. In that sense, land is the mother of all monopolies. That's Churchill's words.
Now, because of the Great Recession, Britain needs the tax reform inspired by Glasgow a century ago.
The flagship policy that the Land Reform Policy Group did come up with, and which was enacted in 2004 by the Scottish Parliament, was the community right to buy. They claimed this would effect a rapid change in the pattern of land ownership. Well, it's done absolutely nothing of the sort. Apart from one or two high-profile acquisitions in remote areas, its effect has been negligible. At this rate, it would take until year 2025 for even 1% of the land of Scotland to come into community ownership. And for 10%, we'd have to wait until the 23rd century. It was all a great deal of effort for very little gain. If only the politicians had looked seriously at land value taxation, they could have dealt with the issue of a much more fundamental land reform and the problem of the council tax at the same time. Even within its narrow rural remit, the land reform programme has done nothing to alter the system of tenure.
The biggest problem, as I would say, is if those who are in government now profess to believe that free market capitalism is the way to prosperity for the largest number of people, then they've got to say, what is the fundamental flaw with free market capitalism as we currently know it, which has led to this great collapse over the last 6 or 8 months? There has to be something fundamentally wrong. And the fundamental wrong is that property is seen as sacred, as far as taxation's concerned, and that everybody's been led to believe that a successful capitalist economy relies on the private, outright ownership of property. But the fundamental truth is that the land was here before we came. It'll be here after we've gone. And nobody created that. And the morally justified source of revenue for any government can only be in the increased value of the bare land, which is created by the demands of people for somewhere to live.
If Glasgow succeeds in persuading Scotland's Parliament to abandon the council tax, it would lead the nation in a revolutionary change.
Something more lethal than razor gangs stalks the streets of Glasgow. It's the discrimination caused by taxation. Many Glaswegians suffer disadvantages that make a mockery of the claim that we're all born equal. Tax reform that returns to the people our equal natural birthright in the land is the key to equalising people's life chances.
To be effective and sustainable, a system of land value taxation must be kept what it naturally is, simple. The annual value of land should be taxed 100%, while income truly created by individual effort should rightfully be untaxed. Therefore, a nation, whether Britain or Scotland, must have as clauses 1 and 2 of its constitution. 1. The national community is sovereign over its lands and natural resources. 2. A rent is due to the national community by those holding exclusive possession of land and resources. Until this is done, there will always be corruption, exploitation, waste and misery. A nation which permits unconditional private land ownership will never be a democracy.
So a century ago, Glasgow's Liberal politicians played a leading role in influencing the government to introduce the 1909 People's Budget and the land tax proposals. Today, we have another opportunity to play a leading role here in Glasgow, and we hope that Glasgow's politicians will carry forward the work they've done this year in 2009 in researching the practicality of the land reform proposals and carry these proposals forward to the Scottish Government.